Okay, I'm going to give this a go. So it may not film particularly well. I've got myself a whole salmon. I need to break it down because I want to put it into cans the way that I normally do, into my jars with some salt and pepper. Pretty simple. Okay, but it needs to start with a fresh fish. So I purchased a whole salmon to do this, and this one has got all its scales and everything on, and I skin the fish, so that doesn't bother me. It's just the skin I don't particularly want, but it doesn't get wasted because my animals love it. So, because this is such a big beast, they always are, never going to fit that on a cutting board even if I wanted to. But first thing I need to do is dry off my salmon because they're always slimy. They just are. It's that kind of fish. They're very oily and very slimy. So just going to give it a clean. And all the fish afterwards that I take off, all the fillets and the pieces I chop up, all get washed and then put into a brine. So it'll all get cleaned up later on. I just need to be able to have a safe hold of the fish while I'm filleting this. And no, I don't do this outside because it's too big, it's too wet, and I need the light inside to do it. Okay, going to make a start. So I will start at the tail, and I can slide him up a little bit. Because it's got the skin on, it makes it quite easy to start to break the fish down. So starting at the tail end, I always just run my knife up until I get to past the tail and I'm at the flesh end, and then I make an incision down to the backbone. I can feel that pretty easily. That's not a problem. And then it's a matter of turning my knife flat against that bone and then running the knife all the way along. Really sharp knife helps. Pressing down into the spine as you're going, because that way you're not leaving behind a heap of flesh. So just working, pushing the knife down on an angle so you can feel the vertebrae of the spine as you're doing this. Now, I don't eat meat, but I do eat seafood. This is the only protein that I do eat. So having it on hand on the shelf is really good. I can get salmon from a couple of places. I can get it from our local seafood house, which I've always bought from them in the past, but the prices of produce, as everybody knows, is increasing. All right, so once I've got a really good area that's already started to be cleared away from the spine, I need to get to its back and run my knife along the back edge of the top of the fish, and that just opens up the fillet for me. So just all across the top of the fish, again pressing against the spine and the bones and running the knife down. My husband was here, he'd make me sharpen this knife, but he's not. So that then opens up my fillet for me. And from there, it's just methodical. Using your knife and running it along the bone, you can feel the bones. You can see the bones. So it's just a matter of opening up the fish and cutting down. In the canning process, all of the bones just melt. So if there's bones left behind when they go through the canning process, that's not an issue because they just disappear, and then that's a good source of calcium, obviously, as well. Salmon's really good with omega-3, which is great for the brain. There's so many different good things about using salmon. Unfortunately, they are all farmed here, but that's just how it is. This is as fresh as it's going to get, though. All right, behind the pectoral fin, just an incision straight up to that first incision I made along the top of the fish. That joins those two lines together and frees up my fillet. And then just continuing along as I was doing, pressing against the bone, running it all the way along, trying not to leave too much behind, but like I said, it'll all be used afterwards anyway, and anything that is left I can easily just pull off because it is getting all into a can or glass jar and be preserved. And that's my first fillet done. The 3.5 kilo salmon. The other side, two ways of doing it. You can cut out the spine straight down and just remove it, or turn the fish over and do it all again. So I'm just going to cut through, cut down my spine, breaking all of those bones, as I go through, cutting them out. It's all of the rib crunches. Sorry for those that don't enjoy that noise. And then I'm going to turn her over. And this is where it helps that I'm ambidextrous. So, because you've got to do it in reverse, which some people have no problems getting the first fillet off. The second fillet can be a bit of a problem. So once again, down to the tail, all the way down until I feel that tail bone beneath the spine, and then turning my knife flat, holding on to the tail really well, stops it moving, and then up we go again. So again, turning the knife so that it's running against that backbone that I've just cut, and then removing yet another fillet. Going around the pectoral fins, around the lateral fin down the bottom. I'm going to take the belly off this one, but I am going to be putting it in the jars that I'm canning. I just divide it up because it's quite a fatty part of the fish, and I don't want a huge amount of fat in just specific 1 or 2 jars. I want to spread that over several jars. I'm just cutting along the top of the fish once again, just to make my fillet. No, this isn't the prettiest method. Down the head, back down to the belly. Like I said, any excess fish that's left on this particular one, I'll just run along with the knife and just take it off afterwards. Right, we'll come back once I've got this done, and then I'll go through the skinning process. So this is my frame. This is all that's left at the end of it, but there's still meat on that. And like I said, we are canning. So I'm just going to run my knife all the way along it and just remove, especially up the top near the back area, because that's a really good area for getting those omega-3 fatty acids because it's quite fatty. So we'll save all of that as well. And like I said, none of this is getting wasted. It can all get chopped up and get used and put into either stocks or stews, chowders, whatever. But I have dogs that love salmon, and so chopped up, it goes to waste. And I also have family that go fishing, so they also get any excess frames that we have. That's just a giant piece of salmon fat, really fat, but the good fats, not the bad fats. Like I said, they'll all be chopped up into small pieces and put into individual jars when I'm doing the jars, so that all the jars have a decent amount of fish. I've got a cat at my feet going, yes please mum, no baby, down. Okay, so head goes away, frame goes away, and altogether not very much waste. Okay, skinning. That's the fun part. This is the part my granddaughter normally helps me do, but I'm going to do this one. So, perfect time for taking this outside to scale it now if I wanted to, or into the sink now that it's smaller and easier to manage. I just don't like the skin. It's a me thing. I don't like it. The omega-3 good fats are just below the skin surface, and I'll be getting those good fats anyway by skinning really close to the flesh. So drying off my fillet really, really well for this part, because you need to get a really good grip when we're skinning. Right, so once that's done, I'm just going to take over my fillet. I'm going to flip it. Whoops, sorry about that. It was a bit loud. Removing that paper towel so you can see my belly fat here. This is the belly line that would normally be cut off when you're purchasing your pieces of salmon, but we want all that belly fat. There are some bones here, belly bones and rib bones, and they're easy to remove. If I wanted to, I could go along with the knife and scoop them out and remove them. I don't need to, because of the canning process totally melts them away. So there will be no bones left when you're eating the salmon. Rightio, getting on to the filleting part, or this part, the skinning. Alrighty, sharp knife once again. Once again, starting at the tail. This time we're going to run the knife underneath the flesh. Move this up a little bit. Okay, so here's the flesh, here's the skin, and there's that beautiful fat beneath it. So I'm just going to put my knife in, and I'm just going to take off the tip just by running my knife under, and then I'm able to lift up my piece of fish, separating it from the skin, okay, and then running the knife down. This is the slower process. Once we get going, we then just need to pull the skin straight off. This is where a second pair of hands is always handy, but never here. So we now have separated the skin from the flesh, and we just keep working, holding on to the piece of skin to keep it tight helps to do the removing part. And then just running your knife along, holding onto the bottom, which is why I've got gloves on, just to give it something to hold on to. My knife is flat up against the board that I'm working on. And yes, there's paper that stops the fish slipping. Just working the knife all the way along, just zigzagging it, making sure I get all of it and there's nothing left behind. Just at the belly part where there's a fin, so there's some scales there, or bones I should say. Just work around that. And then getting hold of that skin again to pull it nice and tight, just to do the final. And then we can just pull it off. Skin removed. And I had myself a big piece of salmon. That's all now ready to be cut up and prepped to go into jars. That's the first piece. We'll move on to the next one. So I'll just dice up this fillet. I've already taken the belly off it now, separated it. So really simple. Straight through, into cubes, ready to go into the jar. If you want to pin bone it, you can pin bone it. It's not needed if you're canning. If you're not canning, obviously you would. Why do I do the canning? Obviously, because I can't stand fish that's been in a freezer for X amount of time, because it gets that freezer taste. And this holds together its shape really, really well. I can keep some of this out and cook it up fresh this evening, and may do that. Just depends on how the day goes. There's a lot to do today. Feed order due as well, so that has to be done as well. All right, so my next fillet, I'm just going to take off this piece of loose belly skin and fat, because I'm going to use that, as I said, later on. That's the rib bones there that you can easily run your knife under. Just again, turning your knife and then just following along the bones and then removing all of the bones if you're worried about them. But like I said, we're canning this, so it's not an issue. Rightio, starting again from the bottom, getting an area clear. I just need to dry the knife off. For salmon being a very oily fish, when you're skinning it, you do get a lot of oil onto your equipment. Rightio, back down the knife, down to the tail. Once again, doing the same thing we've just done with the other side. Close to the skin as you can go, holding on to the skin, pulling it nice and tight, and just letting your knife slide along the skin. Oh, where's my piece of skin from before? That's the piece of skin from before. Just you see, tiny, tiny little bit left over, not enough to even weigh or to worry about going back over with the knife and getting that off. So key is keeping the skin pulled tight as you're doing it. Starting probably with the smaller fish, if you've never done this, starting off with the smaller fish is always a good way till you get your technique down pat. But I've been doing this for so long, it's not funny. One of the first things we were taught growing up was how to fillet and skin fish, because our parents used to go fishing with a big net and get hundreds of kilos of mullet, which then needed to be prepped. And we fished every day when we were down at Talabudgera, down the coast, and so fishing was just part of our lives. So knowing how to do this, and of course with a boat, which means my husband goes fishing and he'll come home with 100 odd winter whiting. There you go, once again, just the skin, nothing else. But it's got all the scales, which I can't stand anyway. But I don't need any of that. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to prep the fillet, just going to cut it into smaller sections so that it can go into a jar. And then into the pressure canner, once the canner's up to full temperature, for 100 minutes. For half pints, it's recommended not to go any larger than a half pint, but I've seen people doing pints. A pint for me is just too much, because this is generally what I am eating with my soups most days, I guess. And so half pint jar for me, that's 3, if not 4 meals with soup. So yeah, I don't need really, really big jars. But if I'm running low, I'm just going to, don't have to, but these pin bones are annoying me. They're easy to just remove because of the way that the fish is being filleted. Why not? Done. Okay, so now you can purchase pre-cut salmon, pre-done salmon, whatever, pre-prepared salmon. Pasta bake salmon or pasta piece salmon is quite cheaper. It's about $18, $20 a kilo at the moment here. This one, a whole fish, is usually about $15 a kilo. So that's quite a bit difference for minimal waste, really. That's how I go about filleting and sorting out one very big fish. Not the biggest fish I've done. Certainly done some bigger salmon. This is just all the belly fat, once again, just to divide up in between each of the jars so that all of the jars get this good belly fat. That's it, done. I'll start filling up jars and getting them into the canner. Thanks very much for joining me. I know there are people out there that can do this so much better, but processing fish for us is like people who process chickens, cows, etc. I don't process chickens anymore. We do if we have to. We'll do the roosters and the cockerels, but usually I don't need to do that. So, and I've done turkeys, and that was always fun, doing the big turkeys. But salmon is a lot easier, and it's a lot better value to do it yourself, and you get the freshest of fish. This can go straight into the jars, or I can brine it first with some salt if I wanted to. And I've done that in the past. I might do that with this batch as well. Just do a salt brine for an hour and then have my jars ready in that time. There you go. That's how to break down a fish. Pretty easy. Thanks for joining me now. I have to take this off to stop that camera. Thanks, guys. Bye now. Okay, now we're going to get this guy ready for the canner. So I have already just finished prepping the salmon. So this is the head and the skin and the ribs. I started with a 3.6 kilo salmon. I now have 2.6 kilos of beautiful fresh skinned salmon meat. This was packed yesterday at the seafood place where I purchased it from. Happened to be Costco for this one, but it's got the pack date at the source, which with Australia we've got our traceability with our seafood. So this was packed yesterday and in a jar and canned today. Will not get that any fresher. Okay, so pretty simple process. We are just simply going to be packing into wide mouth jars. These are Aussie Mason half pint wide mouth jars. Now I use these for my salmon pretty much exclusively for this reason. It makes it a lot easier to get the salmon in and out, as well as it's just easy access. Right, it's the right size for me. But you could use pints. I do recommend using wide mouth jars, so when you're doing it. So it's just a raw pack method that I'm doing, which is the simplest and cleanest method when it comes to flavour. The fish come out really well cooked, not overcooked, not dry, not mushy, but still well formed because we are packing them in. There's no liquid added to these jars because the fish will, during the cooking process in the canner, release all of those beautiful oils. So we just want to ensure that we've got the correct headspace, definitely when doing seafood and doing salmon. So I have got, I think, 8 of the wide mouth jars, and then unfortunately I'm going to have to switch over to some standard jars. But we need to pack it in really, really well, because the fish won't expand. It actually shrinks when it cooks. So that's really good, but we want to also make sure that the liquid is going to be covering, and the liquid being the fat. You know, in here is all that beautiful belly fat, the omega-3 fatty acids in here, and it will all break down during the cooking process and fill these jars. You can add any flavour you like to these jars. Me, I normally would just add salt and pepper. You can brine the fish first with a salt water solution if you want to. I did that with the first lot of jars, I think that I did, and that was about a year ago, and I've opened them up, and I'm not really, they're too salty for me. So I stopped putting the salt brine on the fish, and instead I add my salt and pepper and smoke flavour to the jars as I go instead. I find that way I've got some more control over the amount of sodium in each of these jars. Now, at the end of this process of filling up all of the jars, that's when I'll add my seasoning. So you can add chili, you can have your pepper. I'm going to add white pepper this time because I've just ground some up. I also need to compact all of these jars down really, really well, which I'll do with my muddle tool that I use for the food processor, and just give them all a really good push down to make sure they're all down in the jars, nice and tightly compacted. That's done. So I'm just going to use the muddle tool just to press in all of that salmon. Helps to get rid of any of the air pockets, because like I said, we're not going to be adding liquid to any of these jars. So I just want to ensure that my salmon is well packed out. And this is a good time to be then moving pieces around, anything that's left over, but nothing's left over, or if I need to remove any, I can always put some in another jar. Okay, salt and pepper, and that's about it. Liquid smoke, and then wipe down all of the rings. So you can use liquid smoke as well, to add some additional flavour, just a couple of drops in each jar, and I tend to do the same thing. I tend to, that was a bit heavy-handed, put a little bit into each just for additional flavour, and then move over to a 1/4 teaspoon measurer, where I then add my salt and pepper. Pretty simple. But as much as little as you like, it makes no difference. Like, I spilled that in there, but that's okay. It's all going to get cleaned up afterwards. Okay, salt, top of every jar. I put it in the top and not down the bottom, although you can technically put it down the bottom, and then as your fish cooks, it then mingles with the cooked juices, but I just put it in the top. And I'm not even putting a 1/4 teaspoon, it's basically a pinch. Pepper, however, I do, because this is ground white pepper that I've just ground up in the food mill. So I'll add salt and pepper. All of the lids that I use when I'm doing any of the canning anyway always have the ingredients, if they've got salt added especially. But all of these will be smoke, salt and pepper, and that's all. I'm not going to do any chili this time because this is the one that I enjoy the most. Fresh flats. Flats are the rings, obviously the tops, so clean tops, but we just need to wipe all of these rings. Because this is an oily fish, I'm going to do this with vinegar. Just using white vinegar, clean cloth, and making sure really well clean to make sure that we're going to get a good seal on all of these. Now we're using cold salmon, so the canner is not warming, it's a cold canner. Going to have cold water put into it, and then the fish are going to be put inside the canner on the rack. We're going to bring it up to temperature and pressure slowly, and then we're going to cook these once I'm at pressure for 100 minutes for these little half pints jars. And at the end of that, allow the cool down process. And like I said, the salmon is just divine when it comes out from these jars. Compared to canned salmon, there's no comparison. I would never buy canned salmon again, and this is the only method for long-term storage of salmon that I use. I don't freeze fresh salmon anymore. If I'm paying $20 a kilo, which is pretty good for the salmon, but if I'm paying $20 a kilo, and this is quite a few months worth, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, it's 11 weeks, it's 3 months worth. 3 months of being in a freezer, the salmon does not taste very nice. It gets a freezer taste, which is not pleasant. So I'm just going around the outside of the rings as well. I just want a really, really clean surface when it comes time. Even though I use the jar filler to do it, it's still an oily fish. So I just want to make sure everything is well cleaned. The thing about doing this technique, of course, you don't have to debubble, which is one good thing. So they're nice and packed. And that's how they're going to cook. When they're ready, this is how they come out looking. So you can see the oil on the surface, all those lovely juices, and that's how they come out from the canner. Okay, fresh flats on the top of everything. And then on the rings go and tighten, just finger tight. Like I said, cold canner with the rack at the bottom, the standard rack to keep your jars off the bottom, and then processed for 100 minutes. We'll come back once these are all finished and cooled down, and then they're ready to have all of their details written on their lids. I always write the time on my lids, the date, and that it's got salt and pepper. Easy. That's how we make our beautiful salmon in a jar, and don't waste any of that produce. And now I can move on to rainbow trout. So the total of this is $62. That's how much that fish cost me from Costco. If I'd gone down and purchased it from somewhere else, it probably would have cost more than double that from the last time I purchased it. That's how more expensive it was. I have 12 jars, I think. 12 jars here. And the jars, should have weighed an empty jar, but it's okay. $390, 400 grams per jar. But either way, they are a lot more flavoursome, and I don't have to worry about freezers because we lost power here for 9 days earlier in the year, and that was not fun. So this way everything's on shelves, so it saves money with storage as well, and you have some control of what you're eating and how old it is, etc., because you've done the processing. So like I said, just the same as people who do their own poultry, etc., I do my own seafood. It's fairly standard. I don't have space in my freezers. They're full. I've just done the Costco shop as well as done the bulk chicken order. I have one upright freezer which is full, and the normal kitchen fridge freezer. It's also full. So there's no space for putting produce in the freezers. And like I said, when we lose power for 9 days, it's really hard to suddenly have to be canning a whole freezer's worth of food. So here we are, all done, ready into the canner. All right, I'm going to be double stacking, so I've got 8 of the half pint down the bottom. Put my divider on, and then I'm going to put the 3 that are just your standard mouth jars above. And that's my double stack, so that's my 12 jars in there at the moment. Now I'm just going to check to make sure I can see through that valve, which I've checked, and I can. I've checked to make sure that my valve is well screwed on underneath, and that my pressure valve is also tightened as well. So my lid can go on and the power can now go on, and we'll warm up the canner because it's cold packed, like I said. Just while I'm packing the canner, since it's going to be running for such a long time, I have 3 jars of the rainbow trout as well. So I'll put all those in as well. So we will be cooking all 15 jars at the same time because they all cook for the same amount of time, 100 minutes. Now it's time to turn the heat on once I get the lid on. And then we're done. We'll come back when it's finished. Okay, it's been 100 minutes, plus the pressure canner has come back down to no pressure. The safety valve has popped back down as well. I can still hear bubbling going on inside as it's starting to stabilise, but I'm just going to remove the vent, but there shouldn't be any steam now. But just in case, I'll cover my hand, so because I don't like to get steam burn. So I'll just remove just that last little bit of steam. It's gone. So it's safe to open the canner now. And what I'm going to do, because it is a cold day, I don't want to have any siphoning, and these jars still need to have some time to come back to a normal temperature, we'll say. So I'm just going to crack its lid. And like I always do, I'm going to pop a chopstick beneath that and just let these sit in the canner for another 5 minutes before I take the lid fully off. So that just opens it up and lets the steam out and lets the temperature start to come back to normal. I'm just going to leave it for 5 more minutes. There's no point rushing it now. This has been 100 minutes of processing plus the time it took for it to come up to temperature initially. So it's been quite a long cook in total, but that's okay. We'll end up with a beautiful set of trout and salmon jars for the shells in just a few moments, and we'll put them onto a clean towel just to let them cool down for the next 24 hours as well. Okay, so the lid's off and they're still bubbling. This is what happens when you take the lid off. They start to bubble away. So I'm not going to touch anything now. I'm just going to leave them be for 5 minutes. They're just forcing the air out of the jars now. You can actually hear it hissing out. So there's no siphoning, which is lovely. We're just going to leave them in there just to cool down naturally for the next 5 minutes. Don't rush this process once again. And then I'll move them out to finish cooling in a cooler area for the next 24 hours where they don't need to be touched. The first of the lids have started to be popping. Now you can see them all bubbling away. This is why you don't want to be touching them while they're still bubbling away. So I leave them for another 5 minutes until they've just chilled down a little bit before lifting those incredibly hot jars out of the canner. Need to stabilise the room temperature compared to the temperature within that canner is still quite a different temperature. So I don't want any thermal shock on the jars, and I don't want any siphoning. So just leaving them for a couple of minutes is always the best thing to do. And then we'll come back. We'll find something else to do for 5 minutes. So very carefully reaching in with the jar lifter and keeping the jars nice and level. Just going to remove them, and I'm just going to use a towel on the bottom just to support them as I move them to where they're going to sit. You can hear the lids popping now that they're starting to cool down. That's all our salmon and our trout. So in the smaller Aussie Mason jars, in the smaller Kilner jars, still bubbling away. They're going to continue to bubble away for a while, and these 3 are the rainbow trout. So in total, 3, 7, 9, 10, 15 jars, all chilling now for the next 24 hours before they all get their details written on them. Finished. Simple job. Done. Thanks for joining me. Bye now.